Hello and welcome to this episode of Quakerism. In this episode, we're going to be looking at creeds, and specifically their relationship with Quakerism. I'm going to say just now, I've got a new kitten, and she is loving the fact that there are wires and stuff, and new things to jump on, which aren't normally in this room, so that can be interesting. So, creeds, and maybe a kitten coming in. We'll see how she goes. So, Quakers, amongst themselves, probably more than in the general public, are known for not having a creed, and maybe the problems that come with that, and the liberation that comes with that. And so, in this video, we're going to be looking at what a creed actually is, maybe in a more religious setting, and then looking at how this affects Quakerism, that there is no creed. So a creed is quite simple. A creed is the word creed comes from the Latin credo, which means I believe, and it is essentially a list of agreed beliefs that a community has. So, for example, in Christianity, there are a set of creeds which a lot of denominations hold to in order to either gain membership or to be fully part of the community. And for example, I believe in Catholic masses or services, they recite the creeds, affirming what they say that they do formally believe. Now, so in the past, and how this fits in Quaker history, I suppose this idea of a fixed set of formalized beliefs within the community was opposed to what the early Quakers were trying to do, probably for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that, as I said, if you are reciting these creeds as part of your service, then it becomes a something that people can say but not necessarily believe. If they've been told this is what you have to say at this point in the service, then it's no longer about, what you personally, what has been revealed to you or the community. Then why should you be saying it? It should, if you want to say those things and you say them extemporaneously, then I think that's fine. But saying it in a formulaic manner like that seemed to be opposed to what the early Quakers were trying to do. I suppose another reason why some early Quakers would have not liked, especially some of the creeds that they would have been familiar with, is that they tend to be Trinitarian in language. So, and not saying that Quakers aren't Trinitarians, there are certainly some that weren't, and there are certainly today some that certainly aren't. However, it's what a lot of Quakers felt, even if they were fine with the idea of the Trinity and that mystery, they didn't necessarily like the formulaic language of Trinitarianism as it was belaboured in Christianity from the early church until the 17th century. So not necessarily against Trinitarianism as a concept, but how it was put together as a formula. I think they would say things like, well, the word Trinity isn't in the Bible, and things like that. I can't remember who said it now, but I think there was a Quaker who, when debating with people who were wary of the Quakers when they were first around, I can't even remember what the point was that they were discussing, but one of the comments that the Quaker said in response to it wasn't even necessarily, I think you're wrong or anything like that. They simply said, I don't think this has been revealed to me yet. It could be true, but it hasn't been revealed to me yet. And I think that's quite an important point as well, is that in a formal set of beliefs, these are beliefs most likely made by other people, not yourself, or even the current congregation. And whilst they might be true, if it's not coming from the group or the immediacy of the light at that moment for you, then you can't affirm it. You not saying that it doesn't exist or that it's wrong, but you can't say I actually believe that because that hasn't been revealed to me yet, which I think is quite nice. Someone knows that story and knows who said it and in what context, that would be very helpful. Thank you. And so for Quakers, at least probably, the idea of being a non-creedal religious group has been very important. And where does that leave us today? We are obviously in a very different time. I'd still probably say that the majority of Quakers are fundamentally happy with the idea that we're a non-creed group, but it does prove challenging as well for some areas. Like I've been saying in a couple of my videos, is that the problem that a lot of people have when they come to Quakerism can be that it's really hard to know what Quakers believe. And the attraction of groups or denominations like the Catholic Church, for example, is that, you know, if you're becoming a Catholic, you have to believe these things. And if you don't believe these things, then you're not a Catholic. And it's as simple as that. And so that can be very simple, because if you wanted to know the Catholic position on whatever, then you can look it up or ask a priest or something like that, and they will know, and they'll be able to say why they believe that and be able to point to this, that, and the other as to why they believe that, which is good. In this world of uncertainty, isn't that nice sometimes? However, with Quakerism, we don't have that. And so the uncertainty is there. And I think it is a good life lesson. I think we, as people, need to be okay with uncertainty and also take the time to then think, right, okay, I haven't found the answer to this question very easily. Maybe I should bring this to meeting. Maybe I should talk with my meeting about this. And maybe we can come to an answer in meeting. I don't think it's an easy way. It certainly isn't. But I think it's a way that maybe might be spiritually more enriching. I also fundamentally believe that if you have a query, a spiritual query on your mind, and the answer's easily given to you, then it's quickly resolved, but then it's quickly forgotten and maybe not as embedded in your spiritual life. As it opposed to that, if you had to go through a whole deep communication with the light and with your meeting and really wrestled with that, the culmination or the conclusion of that would be way more powerful. And so therefore the chances of that affecting your spiritual life and improving your spiritual life is way better than if you just looked it up or asked someone and they just gave you a straightforward answer. A person that's spoken quite a lot about this is Ben Pink Dandelion, and about how creeds and Quakers fit together. Something that he mentions in his book Introduction to Quakerism is this idea of orthodoxy and orthopraxy. And so orthodoxy is a group being orthodox or being in line with each other when coming to belief. So that's orthodox. Orthodoxy. Orthopraxy is where a group is in line with each other in terms of their practice, in terms of what they do, how they do their believing. And what he says is that certainly liberal Quakers are very unorthodox, but they are very orthopractical, or they have got a lot, but they're very high on the orthopraxy rating, because whereas Quakers, you can go into a Quaker meeting believing what you want. I wouldn't want to go that far, me personally, but you can certainly go with a seeking heart into meeting. You don't have to believe in the Trinity. You don't have to believe in Jesus. You don't have to believe in any Christian dogma necessarily. But how you do worship as a newcomer or even as a old timer is very enforced. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that if anyone came to a Quaker meeting and said, "Hey, shall we do it like this now?" that would be probably treated with in a very different way to if someone said, I don't think I believe in God. That would be that. I think people would be quite open to that and be happy to have that conversation and talk about that. Whereas someone said, "Oh well, shall we do meeting for worship solely through singing, or shall we all, if we just changed how I can't, I'm not imaginative enough to think of a way of how you could completely change meeting for worship. But if someone actually came up with that idea, then people would say absolutely not. That's madness. However, a very difficult idea on a spiritual topic, like even on the existence of God or something like that on your mind, that would be welcomed and as a point to consider and to discern. In his Swarthmore lecture, which I think was 2014, I'll put it in the notes. In his Swarthmore lecture, he said that, but this is Ben Pink Dandelion still, he said that the Quakers do actually have a creed, and their creed is that they have no creed, to much laughing. But it's true. That is something that has become ingrained within us from the earliest days, even though necessarily it doesn't actually matter that we don't have a creed per se. But we Quakers are, that's something that we say to each other to sort of say, well, we've got a very liberating society that people can come with varying beliefs and various backgrounds and come to find that of God in everyone in meeting wherever they are at as well. I think something that could be said is that, especially with the older creeds of denominations like the Catholic Church, other denominations have them. It's just they're an easy example. Because they haven't changed in so many hundreds of years. That's all very well and good, and those beliefs are probably quite well entrenched. And if Quakers were a bit more homogenous, maybe in their orthodoxy or in their beliefs, then I think we could use some of those or something like that for ourselves, but we don't have that. I think what the creeds don't necessarily allow for is continuing revelation, which is something which is really important to Quakers. Continuing revelation is the idea that the final word hasn't been said yet. So quite a lot of denominations would say that the Bible is complete. Everything you need to know about divine revelation, about what the divine has said and passed on to humanity, is encapsulated in the Bible, and that is that. Read the Bible, it's all there, sort of thing. And Quakers have long said, no, we believe that Christ is still speaking, and still revealing and being revealed in our meetings and in our hearts and things like that. So if we had a set creed, it would have to change all the time in order to allow for continuing revelation. And so even though practically I can understand why a creed is helpful because of reasons I've said before, I think fundamentally that is the main reason why I'm against a creed, is because it would have to be permanently updated. And if it has to be permanently updated, then it becomes a bit useless because, well, obviously a lot of it's going to stay the same, but you'd have to update it like we update our Quaker faith and practice and books of discipline. But we don't hold them to be a creed. We hold them to be a collection of understandings and revelations of Quakers throughout our history. And so we're not saying that is all that, now that's all there is that has been divinely inspired. We regularly change that and regularly update that, but no Quaker has to say, I fundamentally believe and affirm everything that is said in the Advices and Queries or in the Faith and Practice book as a whole. I mean, no one asked that. That's ludicrous. So I think that, I suppose you could say that we have the faith and practice, and that could be a form of our creed, but there's nothing in there necessarily that you have to believe. It's a tool rather than something to affirm to. So what do I think? Do I think we should have a creed? Well, it would make these videos a lot easier to do. However, I think ultimately I agree with the early Quakers that you don't want to believe something just because you've been told to believe it. It does have to feel that it's coming from the light, from the divine, and if it's just something that you're saying by rote, then I don't think that's very spiritual, and I don't think that's very nourishing. Furthermore, I think that we have to recognize the importance within Quakerism of divine revelation. If we don't believe that Christ is speaking to us, or the divine is speaking to us intimately in meeting, then that is a big thing that probably Quakers would say, well, I don't see how that fits in with what Quakerism's about. And so therefore, unless you're completely shifting and reinterpreting the creed like we do with our advices and queries, or the faith and practice, then it becomes a very useless thing to do anyway. And with the faith and practice books, as I've said, no one is saying that you have to affirm to everything there at all. It's something to look at, something to read, something to nourish your life, but not necessarily to hinder you from joining Quakers if you do not subscribe to everything within it. That's making me wanting to go and read it and try and find something that I disagree with, but doesn't matter. Now, in the past as well, mainly in the 1800s, there has been an attempt to create a creed, and I think certainly some American Quaker groups do have certainly creedal documents, kind of like in Lutheranism when they've got the Augsburg Confession and other writings which they hold to be creedal documents. So one of the most famous documents, or the attempts to make a Quaker creed, was the Richmond Declaration. I will put a link to that down there to have a read. And that was a transatlantic meeting of friends from Britain and from America as well to try and get a creed, which this was in the wave of evangelical Quakerism, which was trying to make it more Christian and more biblically rooted and things like that, and they wanted a creed. And so they sat down and they did create the Richmond Declaration, which reads very, very Christian-like. I'm not saying me necessarily... Well, I don't agree with all of it, which is why it doesn't work as a creed. But Britain Yearly Meeting, or London Yearly Meeting as it was known back then, backed out. And then other groups backed out. Some do hold to it, some don't. I think I might do a whole video on that because I think it's quite an interesting topic. But yeah, so then no one actually, not the whole of Quakers would affirm that the Richmond Declaration is correct. Other documents that have been used are a letter to the governor of Barbados. And that's a very... I don't know why that's necessarily chosen as a creedal document, because I think certainly as a modern reader, there's a lot of things wrong with that in terms of its allusions to slavery. So again, how can that be we can't have that as a creedal document, because it effectively says that, well, not necessarily that slavery is right, but it's not saying that we should stop slavery either. This was written in, I think, very early on. I think this is in the 17th century still. So Quakers not necessarily being the abolitionists that they later became. It's not saying it's not pro-slavery, but it's not anti-slavery either. So it can't be a creedal document. So what else could we use? I suppose. I don't think we should be going down that route, because I think it would put that document on a pedestal for no reason. Like these, especially the thing like things like the letter to the governor of Barbados. It wasn't meant to be a creedal document. It was meant to be, like many other documents in the early period of Quakerism, just basically helping people understand who the Quakers are, and please don't lock us up and hang us, please. So it wasn't meant to be a creedal document. The Richmond Declaration is something that's a bit different. It was meant to be a creedal document, and you can argue whether or not that's right, as I've been doing. But again, even the people who wrote the document a lot of them backed out anyway. So it kind of thinks, well, if they backed out, why on earth should we accept it? And so, yeah, I think ultimately, let's not have a creed. Let's be okay with the uncertainty. Let's be open to continuing revelation. And let that lead us. And if that is a creed, then so be it.
Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up button, and do check out some of my other videos about Quakerism in the UK. If you want to keep up to date with the latest videos, please do remember to subscribe as well. It really helps. Thank you.